Welcome to K-Swiss Radio, and this is a new episode of CEOs Wear Sneakers. It's a new episode because I haven't been doing so much recording recently, but I'm back in business, and one of my people who I've actually always wanted to speak with on the podcast is with us today. LinkedIn expert, mastermind, Michaela Alexis. Michaela, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And I said someone I've always wanted to have here because we've met a couple times, or I've certainly knew of you, and we had the chance to meet finally backstage at Haste and Hustle, the Canadian event where you and I are both on the agenda at the same time.
Where I was shaking in my boots.
That's right. And that was my memory of you because I knew who you were. So I think I came up and introduced myself. And yeah, you were freaking out. You were in the midst of a meltdown.
So great first impression.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, what I actually appreciated was that you were backstage and you were going through your speech, but you were actually verbalizing it. And I thought, you know, you weren't self-conscious at all that you were back there with a bunch of people milling around, drinking coffee, and you were putting like a lot of energy into preparation, which is so important in these things.
Yeah.
And I actually thought, wow, that's a really good sign that someone is, you know, actually practicing and taking it seriously and not just winging it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I practiced it so many times, and then I got on stage and I changed it.
Really?
Because I got on stage and I'm standing there and this is after like I'm rehearsing and I'm so nervous and I'm looking out in this crowd. They're like,
it was huge.
It was like 2,000 plus people. I'm looking at all these faces and I start off and I'm like, by the way, this is my first keynote.
Yeah.
And I had never rehearsed that, but it just felt like in that moment, like I needed to say that.
Yeah.
And it's all about being authentic. And all of a sudden the energy shifted. Like people were like applauding because it was an entrepreneurial event. So it's all about taking a risk and all of those things. So it really changed the energy.
Yeah. And I didn't know that was your first speech. And so you've come a long way in a short period of time.
Yes.
Because you're a professional speaker now, and but your actual claim to fame, I guess, is your LinkedIn business. So not only so tell us a bit about what you do for a business on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, I've come kind of a long way. I'm one of the lucky few that had kind of like a side hustle that became a full-time gig, and I started creating content on LinkedIn back in 2016. I was a job seeker at the time and was kind of like, why are we all doing things the same way that we've always done it, where we're sending out a bunch of resumes and hoping for the best? Like, why are we not building something that's bigger than what we do or where we work? And to me, that was personal branding, and I started to look at it a little bit more like career insurance. And so I created content on LinkedIn, and I realized right away that there was this gap in the market where, you know, we were okay talking about those personal things on Facebook and Instagram. And then when it came to LinkedIn, it was like, there's like this buttoned up version. It's like, for some reason, when we're in 9 to 5 mode, then we're not human anymore. Yep. And so, you know, I figured, well, these are important subjects, talking about vulnerability and fear of failure and all these things, rejection. If someone's got to talk about it, so it might as well be somebody like me. And so I've been creating content since 2016 and eventually got to a point where I'm a very reluctant entrepreneur. So when I say I've never been that person that growing up I wanted to be the next Steve Jobs or Gary Vee. I admire those people, but the idea of risk is literally making me sweat right now, just thinking about it. And I felt, and I think all entrepreneurs feel this at some point in their career, where you feel called to something bigger than your fears and who you are. And that was it for me. It was that I felt like I was being called to not only create content and talk about things that mattered on LinkedIn, but also show people how to build the courage to do the same.
Yeah, and I want to sort of stay back there, not what you are today, but what you were then, because I think it was why I noticed you back then. And I did notice you because you were one of the very few people who was doing this. You were using that platform in a different way. I like what you just said about how come at 9 to 5 we're somebody different than we are on our social time when we're on Instagram and Facebook. There's you stood out because there just wasn't that type of content on LinkedIn, whereas now it's just tons of it. But it feels like almost the last even 6 months it feels like it's really grown. It's something you know, when you said I've been doing it since 2016, that doesn't seem that long ago, but that's like the old days, right, in LinkedIn. And there's always been this sort of, if you put the wrong thing on LinkedIn, people will say to you, no, this isn't that platform.
Yeah.
Do you get that a lot?
Yeah. I mean, I'm at a point now where I don't notice those kind of comments anymore. I mean, I got really sassy at an event not too long ago. I was really hungry. But somebody had told me that what I had to say to people that continue to say that I'm doing things the wrong way on LinkedIn. And I said, finally, I'm like, look, 150,000 followers, some of my posts are reaching 2 million plus views. It's been since 2016. I don't think at this point that I'm doing it wrong. And I still believe that. I think that there is this space for these types of conversations. And actually, before I even started creating content on LinkedIn, I did my research because I'm a nerd and I like to do my research. And number 3 on the most consumed content on LinkedIn for articles was self-esteem. Really? And so people were saying that there's a personal and professional self, and yet behind the scenes, they were consuming it totally different. And so I figured that there was that space to kind of just slide in and be that person.
Yeah, and you did it beautifully, and you did it at a time when you were leading that. And so I remember your voice on there as, hey, this is really different. This is a young person who's really talking about careers and using the video format. The other thing that you were doing differently back then, I think, is showing real honesty. And I would say that part of your brand on LinkedIn is about you kind of, hey, letting everybody into your deepest, darkest fears. You're not putting on a persona of, at this on social media, like my Instagram is only the best of me. I don't show you me arguing with my wife or, so the Instagram version of me is amazing. Yeah. The real version of me, not so great. So, but you decided, hey, I'm going to let it all out there.
Yeah. I think that, and a lot of people don't know this about me now. I'm a professional speaker and I travel the world, but I, at one point, couldn't leave my house because I struggled with agoraphobia, which is a fear of crowds and public spaces. And I had that for about 1.5 years. And so how do you go from there to where I am now? And it's really you have to make that choice at some point in your life, either to try and be perfect and polished and all the time be worried about how other people perceive you, or finally just embrace the fact that you are messy, you are imperfect, and just live your life that way. And for me, I was looking around and I'm like, I was having these conversations with people where they're talking about how their anxiety is coming from the fact that they have tension between who they think they're supposed to be and who they actually are. And I'm like, I don't want to live that way. Yeah. I'm tired. And I think other people are tired. And I think that's why you're seeing the culture shift, because, those people that are going on camera and talking about these hard things, don't they look relieved? Don't they look like it's like, and I remember when we launched our #Let'sGetHonest campaign, crying watching these videos of people, because there were people that had spent years and years and years in their career thinking that they had these deep, dark secrets, and watching them release these challenges that they've had to overcome, just looking at it on their face, I'm like, they're going to be able to accomplish so much now because they're not carrying that burden. Now,
was that hashtag or that campaign something you created?
Yeah. So when LinkedIn Video came out, I always like to experiment with new features. And so LinkedIn Video came out, and a few creators and I were like, let's do something cool. Let's do something different and true to like my brand of trying to be honest and open and vulnerable. I'm like, well, what if we get people on camera to talk about a challenge or a vulnerability that they've had to overcome? And so it's so funny because I remember that conversation. It was me and I think 4 other creators, and it was like on Facebook, unfortunately, Facebook chat. And it was a very quick conversation. Hey, like, why don't we try to do this thing? I'll do one, and then I'll tag you. Then you do one, then you'll tag the next person. See what happens. We thought like maybe 5 or 6 people would actually join the conversation. There was like 26 million users that jumped in. And I remember like the whole weekend, I'm just watching these videos upon videos, and they were beautiful. And like some of those people have actually gone on to become LinkedIn creators. They're traveling the world. They're doing what they love because they had that initial video. I have people up to this day that are saying, that was that first step for me to kind of get into the video world. So it's really cool.
That's great. So that's something you created just to get people talking. And
Yeah, I just thought it would be interesting. And I thought that, at least if I could talk about something that I hadn't talked about before and had other people talk about something that they've had to overcome, it would help maybe one person. And I think that's the way that I've approached all of my content. It's not, oh my gosh, like this thing has to go viral or this needs to get a certain amount of engagement. I've never cared about that stuff. I've always been focused on that one person. Yeah. Okay, if I put this out and one person, their life has changed because of this, or they can take that step that they haven't been taking, then it's worth it for me.
Now talk about the thing that really got you going on LinkedIn was this story of you doing a TED Talk.
That was, I feel like I was probably a year into creating content on LinkedIn. And at the time, because I was a job seeker when I first started, I was attracting a lot of job seekers. And then I posted this video, and it was, I had gone for this TEDx talk, and I was overly confident, as we sometimes are in the beginning of our career, where I was like, you know what?
I nail this.
I had just spoken at the Sony Center. I can do a TEDx talk. And so I had rehearsed a few times. I get on stage. And I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but it's a very different feeling when you go. It's an auditorium where they have these bright lights. You can't see people's faces. When you can't see people's faces when you're speaking, it throws you off. You have to have confidence like more than ever before. And I got up there, got super nervous, couldn't remember my name, completely just froze. And I actually have a scratch on the side of my car because I was trying to leave the parking lot afterwards so quickly that I ended up hitting a post. So I have like this yellow stripe on my car.
Just wheel spinning to get away from this.
Oh, and I get home and again, it's those moments in your life where you have two choices. I'm like, nobody needs to know about this. Nobody knows that I was even auditioning. I could just go on with the rest of my life and never talk about this. Or I could ask them for the video and share it on LinkedIn with hundreds of thousands of people. And so I chose the latter. And that was an interesting point for me because in my mind, I was just kind of doing what I'd always been doing. But for other people, it really showed that I was committed to walking the talk. And I think that's sometimes when it comes to vulnerability, it's like, well, you're vulnerable when it's convenient. And true vulnerability is talking about the hard things, even when you have the opportunity to pretend like it never happened.
Right. So you put the actual video of the meltdown out for people to see as and then did you ever go back and re-audition?
You know what's so funny?
Well, mysteriously haven't returned your calls.
I haven't returned, not because I'm avoiding it, just because it hasn't really been on my mind. Since then. For me, it was all about, okay, let me continue to conquer stages. And so I did, like within a week, went and conquered a new stage. And actually, my very first paid speaking engagement came from the planning committee that was there, that watched me fail, actually called me about a month later and said, look, it was just really ballsy that you posted this video of you failing, and we would love you to share that story with our students. So I actually ended up going to the exact same building and speaking for the first time, being paid as a professional speaker with the students, sharing that story.
Yeah, that's great. And you've obviously, you've struggled with your own confidence, and you've thrown yourselves into uncomfortable situations. Let's say, certainly when we were speaking and you're backstage and you're freaking out and having to, doing the rehearsal, it's like that's uncomfortable. I've done that before where I put myself in those situations. Then just before I'm about to go on, I'm thinking, why did I put myself here?
Oh yeah, I have those feelings. I years ago, my business partner at the time, he challenged me because when I get really nervous, I break out in nervous hives up to my earlobes. And he said, I want you to try to make yourself break out in nervous hives every single day. And that's something that I did for that year, but I also carry with me for the rest of my life. Like, I think that there is no greater feeling than doing something that you think that you can't. Breaking out in hives, sweating buckets, and doing the hard things anyways. And I think that so many people think that true happiness comes from a salary or corner office or all of these like material things. It's not. It's about challenging yourself, pushing yourself, and being proud of yourself. There's so many people that spend their whole lives without ever feeling proud of themselves.
Right.
And to me, that's a true tragedy.
Your path was to get a job. Like you said, you found yourself on LinkedIn creating content to find a job, and you've ended up becoming a reluctant entrepreneur. I think I heard you say a solopreneur at some point.
Yeah.
So how has that been? You never envisioned yourself as a as an entrepreneur, but
No.
now you're living that life.
No. And I think, so I have a very interesting story. So I landed my dream job on LinkedIn and ended up working for a great company, awesome culture. And my community grew so much that people were asking me they were like, I don't know what you're doing, Michaela, but can you do it for my business? And so my bosses ended up partnering with me, and I ran an agency for a year. And that was interesting for me because I felt like I had made it at that point. I had the corner office. I had the prestigious title. I had all the things that I had been working for so long towards. And I looked around and I was like, oh my God, this isn't my dream. Like, I've been chasing like this ladder and I'm at the top, and this isn't my ladder.
Right.
And that's hard when you don't have a community of people watching you. But when you do, it was excruciating. And I remember a few months before I ended up leaving the agency, I was in Costa Rica, and we did a zip lining tour. And at the end of the zip lining tour, there's this thing called the Tarzan swing, where they strap you and you like kind of jump off a cliff. And that's kind of entrepreneurship in a nutshell, right? And so I'm swinging off this cliff, and I go from like smiling and laughing to crying. And like the tour operators are like, what happened? Did something break? Did you hurt yourself? I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm still crying. And it was because I realized in that moment that I couldn't remember the last time that I was truly like happy for myself, that I had constantly been working towards creating this image of success, and hadn't really considered what actually made me happy. And so that was that moment for me that I went back and I struggle when I go to Subway. Like, I can't tell you what I want on my sub, right? But I remember the day that I went in and I told my CEO that I was like, I need to go and do this thing now.
Yeah, I actually remember when you took that job. And again, just as a follower of you on LinkedIn, I remember the announcements and the, hey, I got this great new job. I was following you at this point. Yeah. And then I remember actually thinking, it's interesting that you sort of you created this world that was pretty wide now, and you took a job, you almost like took yourself out of that LinkedIn economy, as it were. And then I guess I wasn't really surprised then when I saw that you'd backed off of that and had gone back into this, because it felt like this was your path.
And I think I knew that, but again, it's scary. It's not an easy thing. It's very different. There is so much. It's very convenient to blame a bad boss or blame a coworker that's annoying you for when things go wrong. When you're an entrepreneur, you take on everything.
Right.
All of your strengths and all of your weaknesses are fully on display, and that kind of rawness is not an easy thing to jump into. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't totally
especially when
understand.
you're publishing it on a daily basis.
And I mean, when I left the corporate world, it wasn't all positive.
Yeah.
Because people were following my story, but they saw themselves in my story. And so because I left, then they were like, well, where do I fit in now? And I had people that were that shared that they were disappointed in me. But for me at that moment, it was, I just need to do what makes me happy.
Yeah, for sure. And so when you started, your content on LinkedIn was about, how to improve your resume, or it was very job finder oriented?
My very first article that went viral on LinkedIn was how I landed my dream job in 2 weeks on LinkedIn, because I basically had decided, I don't even know where this came from. I just had nothing to lose. I'm like, I'm not going to send out a single resume. I remember that was the first line of my post. And I decided that I think that community is still alive. It just looks different. And I'm going to rely on the community. This is what I bring to the table. This is what I'm looking for. If you know anybody that's looking, let me know. And I thought maybe 1 or 2 people would maybe send me. And then all of a sudden I'm like, these strangers are sending me job posts, or they're inviting me in. They're like, I don't know who you are, but that was super ballsy, and I would love for somebody like you to come work for me. And so I felt like I had found this great strategy that I wanted to share with other job seekers. And I think that's what it takes when you're a content creator to stay in it long term. There's a lot of people that will come and they'll be a YouTuber, or they'll be an Instagrammer, or on LinkedIn for a year or less, and then leave because they come into it with the wrong intentions. And I think if you can come into any content if you talk to any long-term content creators, they started because they wanted to help somebody, or they found something out and they wanted to share it with somebody, or they didn't know anybody that had their experience, so they wanted to share that experience with other people. And I think that if you are focused on community, that's going to sustain you long term. If you're focused on like the numbers, all of those, it doesn't matter after a while, right? It's just even now, like I don't know about the numbers, but if I go out and meet somebody, like I went to the Dallas airport a few months ago, and this guy, we have no shoes on, and he runs over and he shakes my hand. He's like, "Do you still like coffee, Michaela?" And I'm like, this is exactly why I do what I do, because the world all of a sudden goes from this big scary place to like feeling like a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's what I always wanted. So
you're famous for liking coffee too, by the way, right? I mean, coffee is kind of a big part of your existence.
And you know what's funny is like that was something that it was a happy accident, but then over time I started to realize, you know, in personal branding, I'm like, you know what? I love coffee, but I also really love the idea of a coffee mug, people associating their coffee mug with my mug. Yeah. And so that's something that I just rolled with over time. Yeah. But it's gotten out of control, because I did have a hashtag coffee museum at one point where I invited, because I was like, okay, how can I serve people that are not job seekers? So I'm like, hey, if you have a company mug, send it in and I'll share it with my community. And one of those things that I underestimated again, like maybe I'll get 5 or 6, like 250 mugs from like, I had mugs from the US Capitol, from NASA. I got this huge planter mug from the UK, and like I filled up 2 bookcases. I'm like, guys, please stop. No more mugs. But that's great. But isn't that fantastic to have people from around the world that are sending mugs? And
amazing. So how has your content now evolved from what is the basis of your content now on LinkedIn if people were to follow you?
So I think it's a little more intentional than it used to be. It used to kind of be on the fly throughout my workday, and now I really focus on those really poignant kind of like experience that I'm having in my career. So I will talk about what it's like to be an entrepreneur. I'll talk about agoraphobia. I will talk about fear of failure or rejection. I've been doing a lot of stuff with LinkedIn Live, which I'm really enjoying. Doing kind of interviews with different authors that I really enjoy. Have some exciting people coming up. I actually just did one last week where I brought on my business coach and kind of let people sit in on the session.
Oh, that's
so
great.
That it was a really interesting format, and people have been asking for more stuff like that, where it's less kind of posed and more just like a fly on the wall. It's just all about real content, and I think that people are looking for that candid kind of take on things.
Yeah, and you have some courses that you actually sell, right? So people can buy your courses.
Oh, yeah. So I have my LinkedIn profile optimization course. Right now, I've really shifted over to the brand space, because I think it's important to be able to tell stories as a personal brand, but also as a brand too, right? Because a lot of the people that I'm trying to talk to are these old school companies that are used to radio and billboards and all this stuff. But how do you take some of the lessons that maybe I've learned as building my personal brand over time and start using those for brands themselves to highlight your
we
clients'
definitely
employees.
need that. I mean, we're a perfect candidate for that. In fact, we'll talk off camera about what we need, what you can help us. But any tips for brands, like any of the big ones that you can think of, that brands, what should brands be doing in LinkedIn that you see that they're not doing?
I would say probably the biggest thing is telling client stories. There are a lot of people that will post like a branded testimonial and then call it a day, and we're not interested in it. Like your prospects want to see themselves in your story, so tell the story of transformation. MailChimp is a really great example of it, where they'll do videos of their clients, and then it leads back to a landing page where it talks about the problem, the products that they used, and the outcome. Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting way of doing things. And I think also focusing on your team members. I have so many people that will say that they want to build their LinkedIn page, but they also don't want to be on camera. And it's not really an option. People buy from people. You got to get off the sidelines and get into the spotlight. Like, people want to see who you are, what you stand for, how you treat your employees. Like, all of this stuff matters now. And so I think
absolutely agree.
I think it's a lot of mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think by doing this sort of stuff, Inside K-Swiss, the show we do, the podcast, it's a chance for us to be transparent. I always talk about transparency here, about how people now want to know who they're doing business with. And
absolutely.
It's not these faceless companies, corporations anymore. And I also feel like, wow, we've got so many great personalities on the team here that people would love to get to know, Omar, Kimia, Jeff, all the people who've been on our shows and are hosting our shows. That's who I want to showcase now, and it's exactly the same advice you're giving.
I mean, K-Swiss isn't just the shoes, it's the people, right?
Exactly. And so who better to tell our story, and I think those personal connections are so important. So that's always been my advice. I think there's also, though, not a reluctance, but should we put ourselves out there? Is it, I think when you work for a company my question myself is, should we be so public? Is that trying to sort of make, we trying to give ourselves the fame, or, it's not, the intent is not that, but could it be perceived like that?
Yeah, I think that, it's going to be different with your company page than it's going to be with your personal brand. I mean, I'm goofy on both, but I'm maybe a little bit less vulnerable on my company page than I would be on my personal brand. But I think the point of it is just to have fun, right? How are you talking to your prospects when they come into your office? Yeah. Right? You're having small talk. You're talking about podcasts that you've listened to. Maybe you're talking about your kids. Maybe you're talking. We do these small talk kind of things because it's social grooming. We're humans. We're built for that. Yeah. There's a really great company called Gong.io, and they're my favorite example for LinkedIn company pages right now because they have a lot of fun. Like they do, like the celebrities read mean tweets about themselves. They do something similar, but they do team members that read reviews. And it's so funny and it's so unique. And like you look at their content and you think right off the bat, they're like, oh my gosh, they must have a team of like 20 or 30. And they have a really small team. It's just that they've focused all their energy in making sure that the brand personality is on LinkedIn pages. Yeah. And so I think having fun with it and just kind of showing a little bit more behind the scenes is super important. Yeah. I really feel like LinkedIn is going through this transition. That's why it's great timing to talk to you, because the other thing I always knew about LinkedIn is that if you were ever on it at work, you'd almost have to pretend you weren't. Or if someone walks in and you've got LinkedIn up on the screen, you're like, oh no, I'm not looking for a job. Whereas because that's sort of all it was for. Yeah. Whereas now I'm on LinkedIn a lot for a lot of other reasons. Yeah. It's almost, and that's noticed, I don't feel any guilt by having it on my screen because it's almost gone through a perception change. Yeah. Do you feel that too? Yeah, absolutely. Well, LinkedIn, like the way that it was built originally, and Reid Hoffman has had interviews about this before, it was basically a Rolodex. Like you had your online community and you talked to people that you knew, and it's evolved like all platforms do over time to something that's very different. And I think now with the acquisition of Microsoft, the culture's changed quite a bit. It, to me, is like the world's largest university. You can learn everything that you possibly could want to. When they acquired lynda.com, like you could have your employees that are going on there, they have access to over 10,000 courses. And that comes with the premium subscription. And just regular content, there are so many lessons to learn. Yeah, there's stuff to learn from people like me that are kind of getting started. But I see people, there are influencers that are interns. They're talking about their internship experiences. There are influencers that are close to retirement because they're talking about all their lessons learned. There's not one group of people that makes an influencer on LinkedIn because we all have so many short stories and so many experiences that we can share with each other. And this is the first time in history. Yeah. Right? Yeah. When has this ever happened before? What would happen before is that people would basically work their jobs until they retired, and that was it. That knowledge wasn't transferred to anybody else or maybe somebody that's close within their team. Now we have an opportunity that we can share all of the lessons that we're learning, all of our experience with the entire world. Yeah. It's just, to me, that's super exciting. And people are starting to take much more advantage of it. The amount of video content on LinkedIn is really booming. Yep. And I've noticed it's very simple and genuine stuff. It's like, it's a phone in front of you and people talking as they go to work. I mean, it's almost a bit of a formula now, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because right off the bat, I always think of, there's one where there's like a show with like a teddy bear. I think it's Bobby the Bear. I might have it wrong. Anyways, like people are just having fun with it. And that's what's really exciting is that people have this idea that needs to be this very polished show. And trust me, I've tried with my content. I remember because I would just take photos with my tripod and my smartphone. And then over time, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to bring in a professional photographer and people are going to go nuts. And the first photo that I posted, people are like, what are you trying to do, Michaela? Go back to what you were doing before, because people want to feel, again, like a fly on the wall. They want to feel like you're just a coworker and you're talking about your day. And I think that if you go into with the mindset that LinkedIn is essentially the world's largest networking event that's open 24/7, it's a lot easier to create content, because then all you're doing is just you're talking like you would talk to people in real life. So a lot of the videos that you see are probably just talking head videos. Someone's walking to their car. Someone's on a stroll in the morning.
Exactly.
They're sitting at their desk. It's not these like very like polished like talking head kind of videos.
Yeah, and then there was this bit of a trend of people personalizing video. So people because people always try and sell me stuff. And then I'd get, hey, Barney, da-da-da-da-da. And the first one, I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. You
Video
know, and
messages.
so I reply. The 8th one, I'm like, okay, you guys, I know.
You get 8? My goodness.
Not from the same person.
Okay.
But yeah, after the 7th, and like, seriously, leave me alone. But no, everybody started doing it. It lost a bit of its luster. But the first ones, I was like, wow, I replied right away.
I mean, the inbox, there's such an opportunity because you have video messaging, you have audio messages, which is amazing because like most of us are on the go, right? And to me, I find audio messages way easier to do, stands out in somebody's inbox. You can now, I mean, you can send photos to people, you can send videos. There's so many opportunities now. And it does make a big difference. Because
I get a lot of bad ones where I'm thinking, just to send a straight up sales pitch on a message on LinkedIn is like, come on. Yeah, come on. I mean, that's just such an easy delete for me. And I just think there's a lot more of that than there is of kind of really creative, unique ways of engaging. Yeah,
I think, again, it goes back to a networking event. Would you go up to somebody and pitch to them like before you even introduced yourself? Probably not. Yeah. So I think, shaking someone's hand and taking it, like, you know how much information we have access to now? You can go onto someone's profile. You can see where they went to school, what kind of courses they took. You can look at their activity, see what they're commenting on. If they're commenting on an author that you read the same book, find those points of common interest and build on that. I mean, it's like any relationships, right? Yeah. Long term, it's the best play.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You wouldn't walk up to someone and be like, hey, let me show you this I'm selling. You're like, whoa.
It's super weird. Yeah. Super weird.
I get that all the time. I think I always feel like, man, that's maybe you have a course that talks about how do you pitch someone on LinkedIn, but if you don't, maybe that's a good one because there's a lot of need for it.
There's a lot that you can do with your inbox, and I think that people forget that. I have a friend of mine, and she sells all of her courses using audio messages. That's her thing,
right?
Is audio messages. And I think that's fascinating to be able to find prospects and close business using audio on LinkedIn is so cool.
Yeah. So what is your relationship now with LinkedIn, the company? Are you now sort of part of the family? And
yeah, I've been working, especially now that I'm doing LinkedIn pages, a lot more with that side of things. I've been working pretty closely with the product team. I'm actually going to start posting on the marketing blog, which is super exciting because I think that there's a lot of content that I know personally from my community of things that they're looking for. So I'm really excited to create more content for small to medium-sized businesses because I think it's traditionally been more towards enterprise clients, but I think there's a lot of space for small to medium-sized businesses or people like me that have a personal brand but also run a business and could use LinkedIn pages. So that's one thing. And then I also have a course that's going to be coming out in March 2020 on LinkedIn pages. So super excited for that as well.
Yeah, great. And so there sort of feels like there's a bit of a convergence between, actually this question came from someone on our Instagram earlier. Someone asked, is there a convergence between LinkedIn and Facebook?
There can be. It really kind of depends on what you're using each platform for. I think that what I've learned, so I've been working with a lot of YouTubers that have been transferring some of their content from YouTube onto LinkedIn, and what they've been doing is adding in a piece at the beginning kind of directed at the community. Because I think what people forget about LinkedIn, and we talked about this earlier, is that there are some people, if you're using Facebook, they're also using YouTube, or they're also on Twitter. LinkedIn is the only platform that I know of where people are like, I just want to use LinkedIn. Because it's kind of like the gateway drug of social media. Like, it's like that first thing. And some people just stay there. They love it so much that they just want to be there. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that it is a very unique community. And the people that use LinkedIn love LinkedIn. Like, the engagement rates are insane right now. If people are looking at the data, like, you need to pay attention, because the engagement rates for LinkedIn and for Instagram are the two platforms that are going through the roof. And LinkedIn is making new features and new things to increase that number all the time. And so I think creating content that is really focused on LinkedIn specifically is helpful, or at least adding something onto your existing content so it is focused on your LinkedIn community. Yeah,
I've totally, to validate that, the engagement I get on I have very similar followings, and is way higher. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been actually sort of surprised by it.
Well, recently. You know that they have so they introduced what is called, or nicknamed, the Robinhood algorithm. That was introduced earlier this year, and what it does is it essentially, you're welcome, it takes engagement from older creators that may not notice a difference in engagement, and they give it to newer creators that, like, they give it a boost so that they continue to create content, because that's what they're focused on, is to build the engagement on the platform. And so that excites me, because to me it's not all about engagement. I've had content that has reached 1,000 people that has landed me more business opportunities and stuff that's reached 2 million, right? But I think it's really exciting for my clients that have never experimented with LinkedIn. I'm like, this is the best time to do it, because they're actually rewarding people that are doing it for the first time.
It's really funny that you went there looking for a job, and your job has become the platform.
But I think that's true for a lot of different creators. You think about YouTubers that like started by, they just wanted to share a haul or things that they bought at a store, or they were just excited about video, and then they became full-time YouTubers. And I think that there is so much space, and there's still going to be more creators that are coming out with new cool things. And I think that it's something to keep in mind always, is when I started on LinkedIn, people said that this would never work. Creating content around career experiences would never work. People don't read anymore. I heard that so often. I had multiple viral articles that were picked up by CNBC and all of these different publications, and that is what launched my career. So something to always keep in mind is, when somebody says you can't do something, it doesn't mean that you can't, right? Even with LinkedIn pages a year ago, that's why I started, because I'm that weirdo that's like, oh, you think I can't do it? I can do it. So I actually started focusing on LinkedIn pages because somebody said that they don't work.
Right. So, okay, that's like, they call that showing a red rag to a bull. You know,
exactly.
That's it, I'm going for it. I mean, we could talk all day, and I know there's so much more information that you have on the platform. But I would say to people, it's there. Go to Michaela's LinkedIn profile. Presumably, there's access to all of your courses there and your knowledge. I think you also get not only her expertise, but also the real you. You're gonna learn a lot about her great personality, and it's delivered in a really genuine package where you're gonna hear the truth of what's happening in your life. It's not always gonna be
like it or leave it.
Exactly.
It is what it is.
Exactly. So it's all there. Best place to get you is presumably on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, my website is michaelalexis.com, which leads to all sorts of just fun checklists and all those things that you can download, free tools and webinars and all that great stuff.
Yeah. And I really believe LinkedIn is sort of underutilized as a social platform at this point, or it's got a lot more, people aren't using everything they can in it. Whereas Instagram, I think everybody gets it. Facebook, LinkedIn's the one I think that's got the most upside for people. So
600 million active users. Like, that's mind blowing.
That really is. And so follow Michaela to find out how you can maximize it. And we're going to have you now talk to our employees at the company, because I think they can learn a ton from you. And I think you're going to see Michaela in some K-Swiss stuff coming forward. I won't say too much more about that yet, but she's someone that has always been a muse of ours from years ago. And I'm glad we finally got to get you in the office and work with you. So it's been a real pleasure. This has been CEOs Wear Sneakers, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.